Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's ubnradio.com.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Richard Listens on Sports. I'm your host, Peter Sobey, and alongside me is the illustrious, amazing, excellent psychologist extraordinaire, Dr. Richard Olberger. Welcome, Dr. Richard. It's good to see you.
These titles keep growing.
Yes, and thank you, our audience, for your patience. Here we are running yet a few minutes late, but thank you for hanging in there. We'll still give you the full show here at UBN Radio TV and on Facebook.com/RichardListens. If you're watching us on the live Facebook feed, make sure to check in with your name or a comment or a question. Can't always see all your names, but let's see so far. Oh, my old friend Carrie Burns from high school is there. Hi, Carrie. You're all the way over on the East Coast, so thanks for tuning in. And as more people pop up, we'll say hi to them. Whew, so Dr. Richard, we're kind of catching our breaths. It's, the middle of afternoon here in Los Angeles. It's 102 degrees, at least in the valley. And I'm not complaining, don't get me wrong, but it's interesting for us. We've had this new time for the show now for a few months that we've been testing out. And, it's a fun and interesting challenge in the middle of the day. But we embrace challenges here on the Richard Listens on Sports show.
We do, and we want to make the best quality product possible for our listeners. So please let us know how you enjoy the new time format. We look forward to your feedback. We embrace it. We love it. I love all the people connecting via Instagram and Facebook and the questions and comments we're getting from the middle of the week, people willing to fly in from Canada to be our guests. Students of sports psychology and performance. So I'm humbled and excited. And other than us now entering right into LA rush hour, which I once vowed never to do, that's okay. We'll tackle that. If that's the smallest challenge we need to do to make this quality podcast reach more people and help more people, we're going to make it happen.
And we do a lot of embracing here at the Richard Listens on Sports show. And I would like to take a quick moment to embrace our engineer, the amazing Jarvis Essex, who is there pushing all the buttons and coming up with all the great graphics during the show and bringing our guests in and out so smoothly and seamlessly.
And for his telekinetic powers of pulling up a book before the title is out of my mouth. Yes, it's like in front of me in a graphic. I have to work on my fear response to that.
So our props to Jarvis Essex. Yes. You never see him, but he is the man behind the scenes that makes it all run. And I'm really excited about our show today because once we get done with all our jabbering here on top of the show, we have our regular fitness wellness tip from Caitlin Weiler that we're always excited to see her and hear what she's got to say.
I hope she's going to share some pictures of Lake George too.
Oh, Lake George.
Yes, some really good somatic settling seem to be going on out there. So
okay, we'll have to hear more about that. So we will have Caitlin coming up in just a couple of minutes. She's patiently standing by. And our guest today is going to be really great. He's a gentleman that we met at a seminar at Dr. Ken Reviza's home for sports psychology. Dare we say that term? But his name's Neale Smith. And he's going to be calling in about 10 minutes on the show, and we're excited to get to the bottom of what he's all about and the athletes that he helps at a really elite level in a lot of cases. And I think we're going to be touching on that during this show a lot, including as we get into Caitlin here. But, talking about performing at a really elite level, no matter be it in sports or any other kind of performance. So.
Yeah, and why this guest stands out to me, not only Neale from Peak Performance and his Performance Pie, which you can Google, or Jarvis will throw a graphic up there, which we'll get to let Neale cover later. But, his humility, his own way in which he carries himself as an athlete and highly accomplished figure is really remarkable in the way it's translated to multiple sports and his own unique journey. So I look forward to getting a little bit.
That was actually a great intro. Too bad he didn't get to hear it.
Well, it was
we'll
like
have
the
to save that for him.
But, I do like the thematically addressing that we're trying to invite guests that really we can share their journey to. And it's unique. We'll let him share a little bit, starting from a young age, what you discover about yourself. And sometimes it's one particular quality. We'll let Neale share his, but I was listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast with Maria Sharapova, and she was, just talking about, being a 4-year-old kid in the park, like watching love the repetitiveness of seeing people hit the ball up against the wall.
Wow.
And like, you think about someone like playing elite tennis, and you're like, well, what do you mean? They must have been like bionic and super powerful and super fast, but there was this childlike just noticing of something really good that felt good is a lot of what we draw attention to, and which I'm sure Caitlin will bring us back to. But that is something that everyone can relate to. So anyway, want to bring that up before we get into our guests and our tips, is that the really simple universal element of what we're trying to touch on with the Richard Listens Show.
I love it. And one other just quick thing, since we're talking about performing at elite levels, my Cubs were ousted from the playoffs, but the World Series starts tomorrow here in Los Angeles.
But what a game. I mean, first of all, the return as champions is, I don't know when, there's not many of them. Were the last ones the Yankees in the 90s. So really, really difficult task. And knowing Ken Ravizza, having a chance to meet him, hope he was in that dugout. But they had an amazing series versus the Nationals, that final game that they won, I believe, 9-8.
Yep.
In particular, that one play towards the end of the game where you name the catcher, is it
Wilson Contreras?
Contreras threw the guy out at first base, leading off the base. It takes such courage to make that play in that moment. I was, really thankful for the peak performance coaches who raise our awareness to these key moments in stressful elements of performance. And I think that's a good lead in also to what Neale will talk about today is peak performance under stress.
But we welcome the World Series here in Los Angeles. So
yes,
game on, Houston Astros.
Bring us your tickets, you're poor.
Yes. With that being said, it's time for the fitness wellness tip with our very own Caitlin Patricia Weiler, Coach Kit Cake. Welcome to the show, Caitlin.
Thank you. How are you guys this week?
We are great. How about you?
Good. Well, I was listening to all the, what you guys were just saying too about, we're talking about performance on today's show and kind of talking about, or every week I feel like we talk about everyone's journey because everyone's journey is different,
Absolutely.
right? Even if we're in the same field. So I thought with today's tip, focusing on performance and our journeys, that I would share something really personal with me that I've been going through. I don't know if last week I mentioned or 2 weeks ago that I watched a really great documentary that made me make some major changes in my own lifestyle when it comes to my nutrition. So do you guys remember me mentioning that or no? I don't think so.
It doesn't sound familiar to me, no.
Okay, so I've actually been dealing with fibromyalgia for many years now. And I have points that, it's the fibromyalgia where it'll make me not be able to be active, to not move. I have a lot of pain. And I watched this documentary that gave some insight on how meat actually causes a certain inflammatory effect in the body, like an autoimmune response. And I found it really interesting because I do a lot of research and reading. I'd never heard about this before. So just on a whim, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I stopped eating meat and basically became a pescatarian. And I just wanted to share my experience with you because over many, many years, I have done the elimination diets where, for say 4 to 8 weeks, I've eliminated dairy, for example, or I've eliminated gluten to kind of see how my body would respond to that elimination of that specific food. And I'm so shocked to say that without eating meat for these 5 weeks, I have been completely pain-free. And I'm still skeptical because I do want to reintroduce meat to see if this is truly the effect it's having. But I wanted to bring that back into the forefront of talking about performance, because really that was the last thing I would have thought to do to help the symptoms I was dealing with. So I think whether you're an athlete or you're dealing with a health condition or other things, that we have to look at, the stem of where the problem's coming that's affecting our performance in any way, whether that becomes from a sport or from our everyday life, that, it can be something that, a lot of our regular doctors would not think of mentioning for us to change, because that was my case. So it just comes down to being your own advocate and figuring out how your body works, because we all have these individual machines and they all work, differently than one another. So, I hope that sharing my experience with just trying an elimination diet might spark somebody to try something if they've been suffering with a condition, or if they don't have energy for a while. It could be stemming from a specific food. So I'll keep you posted on how my results are going with that.
No doubt. What a great tip, Caitlin. And thanks for sharing your personal story on that end.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it's certainly an argument for the vegan diet, right? And certainly in LA, we have, a lot of choices. It makes it really simple for a lot of people to move in that direction.
Well, I started this when I was in Mexico. It was like impossible. It felt like there was no resources. So I think too, where you live makes a big difference. And I used to smoke my own meats in my home Weber smoker for 25 hours. So to go from like smoking my own wraps of ribs.
I want to have a show about that.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So you just moved to completely veggie burritos, huh?
Tofu, it's a very different lifestyle here that I'm trying out.
Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to hearing your continuation on this journey, and maybe we'll even keep our viewers abreast on the Richard Listens Facebook page. So you'll have to keep us abreast so we can keep the viewers abreast.
And that might be great. Little, something on a couple different substitutions for meat if people were to try it.
And I'm being my own guinea pig right now. I'm trying a lot of different things that I've never tried before, and I feel better than ever physically and health wise. So something that I'm doing is working, and I think it's just keeping close documentation. Like in the past, I eliminated gluten and dairy, and I did feel better too. And I have a lot of clients that find that dairy can be the culprit of a lot of problems they don't realize. So again, you just have to look at yourself, your body, and your lifestyle. And, if people have questions or, about what they're doing and what it can be, reach out to me on my website or on my pages, and I'm happy to answer questions for you guys.
Amazing. Maybe that too means that we'll have to bring back Mari, our
bring back the nutritionist, to talk about, because we don't want people to get healthy and to stay creative, because the first thought that goes to people's mind is, what am I going to do? What am I going to eat?
Or what am I going to eat? Like you said, in LA, there's so many great vegan or vegetarian places, but that's really not most of the world.
All right, Caitlin, thank you so much for your fitness wellness tip this week. Thanks for sharing and being you. We appreciate you. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thanks for having me, guys. Have a good show.
See you next time. We had the rapping jit on the applause there. I loved it.
The hip hop applause.
Always great to hear from Caitlin on the East Coast. And just a little birdie told us that we might be seeing Caitlin live here in the studio in a few weeks. You never know. A couple shows down the road. That'll be very interesting. But without further ado, after getting that tip, our great guest is with us on the line that we'll introduce in one moment. So like we said earlier in the show, our guest today is Mr. Neale Smith. And we met him at a seminar by Dr. Ken Ravizza. And for your information, Jarvis, his website is processperformance.info, where you could find the performance pie that Dr. Richard was speaking of Neale's. But Neale is... give us a little bit about Neale, and then we'll bring him on, Dr. Richard. Basically, he is a performance consultant at a high level, especially he's helped PGA golf athletes on the PGA Tour, many, many more. But we look forward to hearing his story, a little background, why he does it. Without further ado, Neale Smith. Hey, Neale, are you there with us?
Hello, Peter. Can you hear me?
We can. How are you doing, Neale?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
We are great. We are so happy to have you on the show today.
Oh, good. It was lovely to meet you at Ken's house, and I'm glad I could be on today.
Thank you, Neale, for squeezing us in. I understand you're on the field right now.
No, but I'm in an obscure site, so hopefully the cell phone coverage will be adequate. But I'm not on the road at the moment.
If not, we've got your fancy website photo up. So
Yes. And so far, so
Yeah.
good. So far, it's sounding good.
Well, the beauty about older photos, you look a few pounds and few wrinkles less.
And that's good, right?
Yes.
So, Neale, tell us a little bit. Richard and I were talking before you came on the line here about even your journey. What were you saying, Richard, like about...
Well, Neale, we were sharing how we love to have, guests who, we love to talk about the work they do, but we're also interested in the people that are drawn towards helping athletes. And when I was reading your bio and first of all, the thing that stood out to me was about, you kind of described yourself as, I don't want to, put it modestly, but your terms are very modest, about noticing yourself having an athletic skill, maybe the ability to jump, something that seemed really small to you and maybe fun. And I thought maybe we could begin there. How did you notice yourself, first of all, about your experience with high jumping, I believe it is, and how that got cultivated?
I grew up in a small town in Australia, actually on a farm outside a small town, and it's very common in rural Australia that kids are into sport, and I was one of those kids that was into every sport that was available. Now, early on, it was rugby in the winter and cricket in the summer, and you'd go to the swimming carnival in the summer and the athletic carnival in the winter. But I was naturally good at anything that involved fast, explosive movements, especially jumping. So high jumping, long jumping, triple jumping, they came naturally easy to me. And by the time I was a teenager, I was competing at a national level as a high jumper.
Was that something that someone else noticed? Is track and field popular in Australia?
Yeah, it's one of the sports that's popular. And I think you naturally gravitate to the things that you do well. And that came easily to me. And I always had, I was always fast and explosive, and the jumping was fun and easy. And I was having quite a bit of success as a teenager at it, and was then continued to pursue that. I went to the Olympic trials in '84. I'd won an Australian junior title, and I travelled with the Australian junior team. So I was trying to get to the Olympics as a high jumper, but that was derailed by injury, and then I fell into golf for something to do.
Wow, that's even interesting there that you had the aspirations for the Olympics yourself as an athlete, and then injury derailed you. A lot of times on the show, we do talk about, like, what mindset does it take when you're on that road of, I want to be a level at an athlete at the level of professional or Olympic, and then you get derailed by injury. How did you process that into, like, oh, well, let's veer over to golf? Was it that simple, or what process did you go through, Neale?
I was ill-equipped to deal with the process because it was a major loss of identity. I'd become quite a successful jumper. I'd wrapped a lot of my identity into that part of me, and when that stopped, I really didn't deal with that well at all. I was a little bit lost. Was still quite athletic and wanted to be competitive, but didn't really know what to do with that. And golf was one of the sports that I had played as a kid, but then gravitated to that in that I could do it while I was rehabbing. And then I liked the challenge and the mastery of golf, whereas high jumping came easily to me. I had to work hard to become a good golfer, and it went along a little bit with my journey in sports psych in that I was starting to learn some of the sports psych skills, and I wanted to use that to learn the game of golf faster and try and get to competing at golf a little faster.
Wow, that's actually an interesting technique, like to approach golfing saying, like, hey, if I know the psychology behind the performance of golfing, I might get better faster.
Yeah, which I definitely think an effective mindset and the appropriate use of the mental skills, you can accelerate the learning curve in any sport.
And then, so how far did you have professional aspirations in golf as well, Neale?
Not initially, but then by the time I had finished graduate school, I did my master's with Ken at Cal State Fullerton, Ken Revisa, and then by the time I'd finished graduate school, I wanted to turn pro and give it a shot. And then I did. I was playing on the local mini tours in Southern California. I got through qualifying school my first time, and then played the PGA Tour in 1993. Lost my card and spent another 9 years playing professionally full-time, mostly on the Australian Tour and the Canadian Tour, and trying to get back on the US Tour.
So, Neale, one of the real moments, and it was such a pleasure meeting you. It was really an inspirational day that's shaped the last 6 months for me and a lot of people that we've met that came from that training. So I really do want to thank you again for showing up that day. I know you drove from down in Orange County, but it really moved me when you spoke about Dr. Ken, and we mentioned him a few times on the show, and different guests have referred to him. Even got to read him quoted a few times in the Rise of Superman book that I've been pouring through on the weekends. And you mentioned the importance of meeting him as a mentor at a key time in your life. Can you talk a little bit about that, how maybe meeting Ken or any other mentor at that moment may have helped you transition or make this transition?
Oh, definitely. Oh, I'm very honest in saying he's been the most significant adult male in my life. I lost my dad early in my life, and he became not only a father-like figure, but also just a wealth of knowledge and a fine human. You know, anyone who's spent time with Ken always appreciates his humility and groundedness and ability to connect with people. I've seen him do sports like one-on-one presentation 50 times, and each time it was different. It was meaningful to that particular group. You know, he's a master teacher, fine human, and anyone who's got to spend time with him has always been blessed.
So what did finding, this powerful figure that really had components that you had never or had lost since an early age, how did it translate into your transition as an athlete or sports psychology professional?
Well, it was starting to help shape the mindset that was required for excellence for me, and also gave me a vocabulary for that, because I had it intuitively as a high jumper, but didn't really understand it. It just came pretty naturally, and I didn't have a vocabulary for it. And that helped me with that, but it also definitely helped me with the mental skills of how to prepare for competition, how to stay focused during competition, and how to review competition to make the fastest progress. And like out of grad school, I finished tied for first at the qualifying school, which was quite a surprise to a lot of people because my background was in track and field. But to me, it wasn't a surprise in that I was a good athlete. I'd come out of this idealistic grad school environment, and I was immersed in that with quality help from Ken for 2 or 3 years. So that made that possible. So it gave me a framework in which to pursue this that was logical, and it resonated with me.
I think it just occurred to me that Neale, you could be the reason why the NFL is drafting rugby players indirectly.
Right.
Well, that they know how to tackle really well, and they can kick the ball pretty well as well.
So, but this learning about that athletes from similar sports, or at least that have skill sets that they can translate from other continents. I'm thinking that probably has to be on the rise as scouting can further reach and coaching contacts expand.
Yes, and I think if you're a good athlete with a good movement vocabulary, you can transition into multiple sports. Especially if you have the right grounding early on just the various movement patterns required for each of the sports. If you specialize with the right effort and mental training, you can progress quickly in a lot of sports.
And you've highlighted a few times now, Neale, and even your own use of language terms related to performance psychology. And I'd love for you to go over how you came upon the performance pie and how you utilize it. But the one other question I had for you that came up was you mentioned a lot these translatable skills to the understanding and developing the language to explain your internal process. And I was wondering how many of the athletes you come into contact with kind of have this intuition, but don't know they don't have a language for it.
It's not uncommon. I would say based on where I live, there's a lot of good education available in Southern California. So most of the juniors I work with, are, they're reasonably well educated, and most golfers that I work with also have a reasonably high level of education. So they can articulate this to some degree. But also it's like, even if they can't, the ability to do what they need to do is most important. Because you can have some athletes that don't really do the skill or play the game well, but they can describe how they think they should do it. So the most important is the doing, whether they can describe it or not. It was just helpful for me in my journey to develop a vocabulary to be able to do that.
Yeah, it speaks to the individuality of each athlete's performance and process. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And Neale, now that you've grown as like a performance, I guess like coach, and we do want to go into the performance pie here, but a quick question I have for you too, especially since we met you at Dr. Ken Reviza's workshop, where you also did a lot of great contributions. How do you, when you're mentored by such a guru in the field, how do you differentiate yourself from someone like that? Like, how do you find your own voice as a performance coach?
I think you evolve into firstly, Ken was very clear in graduate school. He didn't want any of his graduate students to be a mini Ken. So even though he explained his conceptual information was the same for everyone then takes that information and processes it differently and works with it differently. If we gave a sports psych presentation, I'm very sure that ours would be very different in its focus and its feel. Even though there might be some common training there, you gravitate towards what feels authentic to you and what you've had success with yourself and your athletes with.
And so now bringing that into your performance pie, it's interesting to me because at the very center of that is healthy and happy, and then everything revolves around that. Do you have the pie chart there, Jarvis? Oh, it's up. It's up on the screen.
I told
we're
you.
Looking at it, Neale.
Telekinesis.
Jarvis is one step ahead of us, Neale. So yeah, we're looking at the performance pie right now. Tell us a little bit behind how you made that, Neale.
I developed it in grad school, and I've always been an athlete. I've always been interested in performance. This story might actually help understand why I kind of got into sports psych initially. Was I went to a training camp with 10 other high jumpers. It was about 2 weeks before the national championships, and there was about 10 guys in Australia that were of a similar ability. We had to do a series of physiological testing for the Australian Institute of Sport, and it was pretty shocking how close we all were in terms of the physical parameters. 2 weeks later at the Nationals, one guy jumped 2 inches higher than he'd ever jumped and won comfortably. One of the favorites no-heighted, like he missed his opening height 3 times and was eliminated. So that got me thinking that performance is more than just the physical, because as a teenager, I just focused mostly on the physical. If I did the training, I would jump up, and I got a lot of feedback that I did that. So I think naturally I was pretty good mentally, but that really showed me that some athletes can handle the competitive stress and some athletes can't. So that initially got me interested in sports psych, and then I took a class in my undergrad which got me further interested, and then I wanted to do more study, and thankfully fell into the program at Cal State Fullerton with Ken. And while I was there, I developed I was interested in accelerating my progress in golf. I knew there was multiple factors that were going to go into that. I like structure myself, and I just came up with these things that if you take care of these things, these are likely to give you the best chance to move forward in your sport quickly. I put healthy and happy in the middle for a reason, in that if you're not healthy as an athlete, obviously you can't do the other things required to improve or perform. And if you're consistently unhappy, you might want to question why you're doing it. So if that's out of balance in the core, it's unlikely that the other performance components are going to be maximized. So that's why that's in the middle.
So how did you do that for yourself right then when you were on this journey and you met Dr. Ken and you realized you were going to pursue golf, but there was certainly not a comfortable process? How did you find that happiness in your new transition?
Well, it's then understanding that failure is part of the journey. And I was a little bit older. I was, in my middle 20s at that point. I'd transitioned from one sport to another. I knew it was going to be a difficult challenge, what I was doing. But also it's understanding that the making mistakes and the failure is required to improve. And that's where Carol Dweck's work is very significant in terms of mindset and understanding how to process mistakes. Can either help you move forward, stay where you are, or go backwards. So that's a critical part of my work, especially in golf, because there's going to be mistakes every day, and how you process that is critical to moving forward or not.
And speaking of golf, I saw this great article in golf.com by Hunter Mahan, 5 ways to hit the perfect pressure-proof shots. And of course, he cites you for really helping him out. So how do you help golfers at that level? I mean, you were obviously there yourself, but now you've got these professional golfers on the PGA Tour coming to you saying like, hey, I need to perfect my shot.
And before you answer that, Neale, I mean, I just want to say when I read this article that for the layman who doesn't play golf, that, when we watch the TV and they show someone stepping up to the take the shot, and granted, it seems like a really difficult task to hit a ball that far and to a specific distance, but I don't think we understand what's going through the mind of an athlete, that you really put attention to my consciousness and awareness about going through your practice shots, going through similar times you've been in certain situations, figuring out ways to reduce the pressure of the moment. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Look, there's layers and layers to the preparation that helps a good touring pro perform well. We could spend a couple hours just on the preparation, say, for touring pros. But once the touring pro is out there and preparing for the shot, the process of how they get into the shot, we know is very important. And there's a sequence that the player must go through. And the 3 words in that sequence that I find really, really important is intention, attention, and tension. So a player that's performing well will have a clear intention of what they want to do. Their attention will be on the right thing at the right time, and their tension level will be appropriate for the task. A player that's struggling often doesn't have a clear intention or doesn't believe it. Often their attention's on the wrong thing at the wrong time, and often their tension is generally too high.
Wow, that's such a great way to put it. Do you actually have them think of those words in those situations, or do they just have to get to a point where they live those words in those situations?
In the beginning, it's more conscious, where they have to either verbalize that than their caddy. A lot of the processing for the shot is done with their caddy, and with the right coaching with the player and the caddy, a player that struggles with that, they'll have to verbalize, all right, on this shot, I want my ball to start here, I want it to curve like this, and I want it to finish there. To be clear, the intention on the ball flight and the result of the shot needs to be clear. The player needs to be clear on the body motion and how he wants to move the club to produce that shot before he even walks in. then once he's walking in, the attention needs to be on the right thing at the right time, which is there's some critical variables in the setup and some balance and posture for the player they need to get right. And then the player's got to move correctly, both body and club, to get the club on the ball correctly to make the ball fly to the desired intention. So now a top-notch touring pro, when they're playing well, this won't be that conscious. But golf, those sports where you're not in the zone very often, and you usually have to think about something, and it's more important to know what to think about before you even get there.
Yeah, because on one hand, it's like, oh my gosh, that's so much to think about. But then on the other hand, if it's kind of ingrained in you and you know the right things to focus on at the right moment, you got it. That's simple, right?
Yeah, yes, but it's an attention sequence. So one thing shifts to the next, which shifts to the next. And in any good pre-shot routine, the function has purpose and any good pre-shot routine will have purpose and function. And even though it might be a lot of thinking, it's thinking about the right thing at the right time and moving on to the next thing. And I also find that it's a technique to keep your conscious mind occupied. And there's less space for the negative things to jump in. And in golf, one of the big things is the negative thoughts jumping in of where the ball may go. Don't go there.
Wow, yeah. And I mean, what's really interesting about that, Neale, is that that's advice that can be given to everyday life as well, right?
Yeah, well, one of the ways I describe that is that at conscious mind level is if you have 10 units of available focus, that you place all 10 available units, or as many as you can, on the task at hand. When a golfer's doing well, there'll be 9 or 10 on the task. When they're struggling, they might have 4 or 5 because they've given 1 or 2 away to don't miss it to the right, 1 or 2 away to I've just bogeyed the last 2 holes, 1 on what's for lunch, 1 on I don't know why my wife won't text me back. It's like whatever it may be, they're giving units away, and now they have less focus on the task at hand.
Wow, and even bringing that up makes me think like, for even your casual athlete, but especially a professional athlete, you really have to have your shit together for, excuse my French, at home, so that isn't taking up units when you're in the big game and stuff like that. Like, if you don't have that together with your wife or your girlfriend or boyfriend or family, and you're thinking about that during the pressure moments, forget it.
No, and look, that's part of the job of being a professional athlete is try to stabilize your home environment to make it healthy and happy, not only for the athlete but also everyone else involved, because it's a pretty self-absorbed life being a professional athlete. So ones that I find that do it well have that stability in their family life, but also change the hats well. As soon as they leave the course, he's into husband role or parent role and does that successfully. If he carries the professional athlete role in, that's where some of the instability happens at home.
Who are the professionals that you direct people to most as exemplifying both the pre-performance and mental skills in the current day and age?
Athletes in general or golfers?
Golfers.
Well, I work with high school, college developmental pros and tour pros. So, and at each level, you'll find athletes that are organized and not. You'll be shocked at sometimes even at the PGA Tour level, where the guy really is not that organized or doesn't have that together, but he's just really good. Whereas you might have some other athletes at lower levels that really have it together, but unfortunately aren't that talented. So I find the superstars are the ones that have the high talent and have their shit together.
Right. So, like, now if we open it up to any sport, though, Neale, like, are there any professional athletes out there in any sport that you look at and say, wow, that guy seems to have it together to me? Like, the message that he's putting out there, and when I see him at the plate or on the field, are there any athletes like that you're looking out there right now to your younger athlete and saying, hey, there's a guy you can follow and exemplify?
I don't know him personally, and I don't know a lot about his story, but I see Russell Wilson and how he goes about it for Seattle.
Yeah,
He seems like he's got it together. There's quite a few players on the tour come up in the last few years that are very successful quickly and seem to have it together. Ricky Fowler, Jordan Spieth, Justin Thomas. There's a real couple of young players. There's a couple of players from overseas that are on the rise. And golf's a sport that has a lot of quality coaching, and there's about information not only for technique stuff but psych and nutrition as well. And it used to be if you're established and well on the tour by the time 30, you were doing well. But Justin Thomas was Player of the Year last year and won again last week, and he's 22 or 23.
Wow. Yeah, I was thinking of two instances recently I saw with Jordan Spieth. One where he got stuck in a major tournament in, I believe you call it, I don't know if it was in the pond or in the rough, and sure the pressure that must have been would have been pretty difficult, and I think he was able to escape danger pretty well. And the other was an instance, I guess he was playing in one of these international competitions as a team, and the rules are slightly different, where he may have stopped the ball from rolling, and I guess they got disqualified on the hole. And I was just thinking as a team how that must have been, but they actually believe they rebounded and won, if I'm correct. But these unique elements to, even though you're a professional, I'm sure you didn't plan for the ball to wind up amongst by the alligators.
Yeah, and Jordan's got a very advanced mental game. So his physical skills are good. His putting is amazing, but his mental game is very mature. And if you have a good physical skill set with an advanced mental game, you can do well in golf.
So, Neale, we are getting to the point where we will wrap it up with you, but just a couple more quick general questions for you. I know you work with a variety of athletes, the touring golf professionals, college, amateur, junior golfers, and you've worked with equestrians, track and field, tennis players, volleyball, gymnasts. I mean, obviously golf seems to be your forte, but outside of golf, what's your second favorite sport to consult athletes with?
When I was in college, I worked for men's gymnastics, which I knew nothing about. And I found that to be really interesting to learn about the sport. I had done quite a bit of consulting for Stanford men's golf. And one year up there, the sailing coach contacted me and wanted me to help his team. And I had never sailed at all. I didn't know anything about sailing. So occasionally I get an opportunity in a sport that I know nothing about. And I find it quite interesting to go and learn their culture and see how I might be able to help within what they do. Because the concepts are the same no matter the sport, but what you focus on and how you apply the concepts obviously are different sport to sport. There's sports where, like a closed sport in golf, when you decide when you go, is obviously different to an open sport like basketball, where you have to, when you move and you have to react. But differences in the sport's quite interesting. I grew up with horses and grew up on a farm, so working with equestrian is natural and easy for me. And also any field athlete, I've got a long history there, so that's comfortable for me as well.
And on a final note, here on the Richard Listens on Sports show, we talk about youth sports a lot and kids and what they need and information to help them along. And I know you like working with youths a lot as well. If you could give, one or two nuggets of great advice for that young aspiring athlete that wants to get to a professional or Olympic level, what would the Neale Smith great nugget or nuggets of advice be?
Do the journey healthily. You are not your performance. If you have a good performance, that doesn't mean you're a better person. If you have a bad performance, it doesn't mean you're a worse person. So challenge is inherent in sport, and the higher you go in sport, the more the challenge there is, and the higher the level of the competition. So if you can learn early that this is going to be a challenging journey with some frustration and disappointment, that this is part of the journey, to celebrate your successes and keep trying to find your individual recipe for success. I think that's critical. It's very easy in every sport to look towards who the elite player at the time is and go, well, that's how I need to do it. There might be some information that's valuable from that, but it's more important to learn your way to do it.
Amazing. I love that advice. Dr. Richard?
Beautiful nuggets.
Absolutely.
What about Neale, if you're like yourself and you're from a rural area, you don't have as much access to organized sports and things like that? Any tips for someone like yourself?
Well, I think sandlot sport and movement is a great way to learn sport. You know, it's self-organized. I think there's some downside to adult organized sport all the time. You know, there's some advantages, obviously, in getting competition, but also there's some disadvantages that everything's adult organized and the kids are told what to do all the time. Whereas in sandlot sport, you kind of have to make up the rules yourself to some degree. You have to organize yourself. You have to determine what's fair play within your group. You know, so there's some certain advantages to just the organizing it yourself. You know, and then obviously graduating to competition in an adult organized setting. So not to perceive it as a disadvantage. Like, to look at the PGA Tour, there's plenty of players out there that didn't come born with the silver spoon and went to the nice country club. You know, there's plenty of kids from rural areas that love golf and worked diligently at it and worked their way up the tree. The one thing I do love about professional golf is that it's a meritocracy. You shoot the score, they give you the trophy and the check.
Right.
Well, Neale, I sure hope we can see you again soon. And when we do, if the home is appropriate, I want to challenge you to some stoop ball or stick ball, where my mental game is solid.
Okay.
That is Sandlot at its
challenge.
best.
I look forward to it.
So for all of our watchers and listeners out there, if you want to reach out to Neale Smith, his website is processperformance.info. And they can email you there as well, right, Neale? At what's the email address for you?
It's Neale.
Whoops, I think we actually, for the first time, we actually lost you a little bit. It's Neale, like Neale.
Jarvis has it on the
at
screen.
processperformance.info. Are you still with us, Neale? I think he dropped out. That was kind of like pretty wild that we had such a clean connection the whole show until right when we're saying goodbye to you, Neale. So
check out the Process Performance Pie.
Yes. And we can't thank you if you're still listening to us on your phone, Neale. We can't thank you enough for being our guest and taking the time to share your wisdom and stories with us and our listeners and our watchers. So thank you very much. We'll keep people abreast of your journey along the way as well as we keep in touch with you. So
yes, we're grateful. Thank you for making time despite being in a difficult to communicate area. I know you can't respond right now, Neale, but we're grateful for both having you, an elite athlete, someone who overcame injury, and someone who now is out there helping and inspiring others. So thank you for being a part of our show.
So thank you, Neale Smith. And Richard, I loved it. That was just some those nuggets of wisdom at the end were fantastic.
Sandlot sports, baby. Got me
Sandlot
excited.
sports. But even just the whole thing too, like I mean, we actually hear this time and again, like the whole thing I love the mantra of you are not your performance. You know, it's such a basic thing, but once again, like you apply that to life, you know, like if you have a bad day or you did something you're not proud of, like don't let that day or that moment define you. And the same thing, if you have a super awesome day or did something great, yeah, be happy about it, but don't get to the point where you're egotistical and rubbing it in people's faces and all of that. Like, remember that even that does not define you as much as success can define you, but it's what you do with it.
One of the things being around youth sports and encouraging getting to be around, young kids playing a sport for the first time, some of them, is the ability to like focus on these really small things. That someone had the choice not to play goalie for the first time and did, or that somebody, they let in a few goals, but they didn't let in the third goal.
Right.
I mean, and it's really interesting when they start to focus on that loss or that they did something wrong, that if you can point their attention to the amazing thing that they sometimes they've selected it out, and it's just a brilliant moment where you can see their brain kind of shift to go, right? So it's a real amazing thing that Neale was talking about. I'm really glad that he, even as somebody who went to the highest levels and Olympic hopes, is able to look then about, that he just had a talent at jumping and loved it. And
I know, I love that too. Like, I'm a kid and I love jumping. Like, what am I going to do with this? It's like, well, wait, there's a lot you could do with it.
Yeah, go grab a pogo stick, go grab a jump rope, like,
But think about
simple.
it though. Like, even in the rural, he found that he was good at like moving and jumping. And I know there's things like baseball. You need equipment. You need field. You need people to play with. Golf. You need equipment. Football. You need a football. You need people to play with. But think about track and field. You could live anywhere in the world and become a world-class runner or jumper because you need nothing except a area to run and jump.
Right.
Which you could
we
pretty
know
much...
what we're up against in the Olympics, right? Several people countries that they run the countryside. And they run many miles a day.
Right, and I guess it's no coincidence. Like, a lot of the marathon long-distance runners are from Africa, and because they don't have access to a lot of sports or equipment. And what do? They run a lot and get really good at it. Like for us, it's like for us to, obviously a lot of people can run the 26.2 miles, but if you're like conditioned, like they're doing it in like 110-degree heat probably and stuff like that.
Not only that, but I think I understand that either Kenya or Ethiopia, when they're selected to be the Olympic hopefuls, they like put them in a house together. Like you have to take turns like washing the dishes. You have to learn teamwork.
Wow.
You've got to learn like who's going first, almost intuitively, like Neale was talking about. So you may be elite, you could be the fastest in your country, but if you can't understand when it's your turn to kind of go to the front of the line and when it's your turn to hang back, these things that obviously when you're moving at a very high speed can't be verbalized even.
Right.
Or there just need to be maybe cues worked out or hand signals. So,
and that kind of goes too with like not letting your performance define you. Like if you're with a team of runners on a relay
and you want an individual medal, right?
Yeah, it's like it's not going to work that way. So it's amazing, like just how that simple phrase can be applied so much. And we've only got 2-3 minutes left of the show, but I'm also really curious to ask you now, Dr. Richard, because you are a youth coach and you're involved in youth sports a lot. How much, you're dealing with like a younger youth here. You're dealing with like what, 12-year-olds and...
I happen to be exposed all the way from 8 up till 14, so
it's like how much of this like psychology and like mental edge do you give kids? Like I'm sure like I love the thing that Neale was talking about, like, you've got 10 units in your mind when you're performing and you've got to try and make as many of those units about the game and the moment that you can. Like, how do you convey stuff like that to young kids?
Obviously, a thought process like that, even though it seems simplistic, might be able to be grasped by someone who's a teenager or someone who wants to learn mental skills. But an 8-year-old, it's got to be a lot more fun and creative. In fact, we had a game yesterday where they made it where the coaches could not offer coaching.
Wow.
And I was completely flustered because I tend to be a shouter and an over communicator probably.
You a shouter or what?
At least on the soccer field, I guess I'm learning about myself. But, and one of the parents said to me, well, assign one kid in each row to be the communicator. And I tried to choose people that may not naturally be the most yelly, shouty type kids. And it was interesting to see how that worked out, or that they could communicate with each other from the sidelines. So teaching them these skills from an early age, that they can be accountable to one another, that they can be, in control of their mental game as well as their physical game. And like I mentioned, dealing with small perceived failures, and helping them understand the joy of just playing, the joy of just trying. When something we did in practice, they do it in the game, I want to point attention to that, because it's really an amazing thing that despite being fatigued, exhausted, the heat, they're naturally applying something physically. So whether it just be that physical practice led to a physical execution of something, or whether their thoughts are in line with that, they may not have the language or be able to articulate it at that age.
But sometimes you just need to point those little things out to them, huh?
That's right. We hold the language. We have the ability to communicate and give them an understanding. We have the ability to help them deal with disappointment if they're willing to.
And we being the youth coaches or the parents.
The coaches, the parents, the community, the sports psychologists, the athletic directors, the teachers. If someone notices the next day in school that someone's appearing depressed, sad, whatever, not dealing well with team dynamics or how a team is doing, they can, bring in greater support system and enhanced processing about what's going on emotionally related to loss or failure or identity.
Sounds like something that one day Dr. Richard should write a book about. But in all seriousness, I hope you all got a lot out of it. Another special thanks to our guest, Neale Smith, today. It was really, really great to have him on the show. Thanks again to our resident fitness wellness expert, Caitlin Patricia Weiler on the East Coast. And in a couple of weeks when we're back live, our guest is going to be Dexter Davis. He's a really interesting gentleman that we met up at Stanford, and he's based out of Atlanta and has his own production distribution company. So we're going to be talking about like a whole different level of performance that's, kind of almost the performance of having to release a movie. It's kind of like that's your time up to bat.
And he's broken a lot of barriers to do what he does, and look forward to hearing more about his work with diversity in the media.
And then in a couple of more shows, we have Simone from KTLA.
That's right.
Coming up.
That's right.
And
she's been on the frontier with the kneeling in the locker room and the anthem and all those issues. So we look forward to having that topic addressed.
So lots of great shows coming up. Thank you all for watching and listening to Richard Listens on Sports here at UBN Radio TV and Facebook.com Richard Listens. And we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
And on Instagram, Richard Listens.
Richard Listens on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks a lot. We'll see you in 2 weeks.